All right. So, yeah, for the past 21 days, the world has watched missiles redraw the map of power. The United States, Israel, Iran, three forces colliding in a conflict that could reshape, or maybe it's happening already, reshaping the global order. Oil routes have been shaken, alliances have been tested to the core. The global south is watching closely, and Africa, once again, standing at a crossroads. Now, while analysts debate strikes, casualties, and military tactics, few are asking a more important question: what happens after? What kind of world emerges out of this? And particularly if Iran wins. And what if it doesn't? Today, we are stepping beyond the battlefield to examine the future, global power, African agency, and the shifting balance of the 21st century. And that's why we have here our brother, Pan-Africanist Kwame Gonza. So I'd like to say welcome, Kwame. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Mahlet, and greetings to everyone who's watching Connect Africa. I think it's timely that we deliberate on what is going on globally. Currently, of course, led by the major leading event being the war between Iran and then the United States combined with Israel, or another person would say the attack on Iran, to be precise, because it is not majorly a war. You can say it was started equally with the same intentions, but it was just an attack on Iran, to be more precise, by both the United States and Israel. And of course, as you've mentioned, we need to step beyond this war and then look at its consequences. And us being Africans, of course, we need to critically look at what is going to happen to Africa, how it is going to, affect Africa, on the whole. So I think this is a timely conversation for the African people, especially, to pay attention to these kind of events.
I agree. So let's dive into it. Now, let's go. Of course, we are concerned here. Our discussion will be focused what happens after, because that's something what everybody is missing while analyzing what's happening exactly now. Now most global conversations are focused on what's happening right now, the strikes, the alliances, the escalation, but we want to shift the lens. Why is it important to start asking what the world will look like after this war, especially from a global South and African perspective? We are going to dive in it by asking you the impact, but if you can just tell us even why it matters for us to discuss this, meaning what happens after.
I think that Mahlet, it's important to before we go to what will happen after, to deliberate on what it is itself that is going on, because the question of what is happening or what is going to happen after this war is a consequence, all right? Because we always have cause and effect, but the results of what will happen after this war, those are effects. But it is also important to look at the cause, because this is very important, because this is the genesis.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we have been talking back and forth about this behind the scene, although not directly on the platform. You are absolutely right. So go ahead and let me just start. Did it caught you off guard? Were you surprised when US and Israel attacked Iran? And with that, tell us what's happening.
Yeah, somehow I was surprised, but on the other hand, also I wasn't surprised. I was surprised in a sense that the United States, of course, participated in this attack. It was a surprise, and of course, it was also a surprise to many across the world.
Mhm.
Okay, even within uh, the United States itself, it was a surprise. But it was also not a surprise, on the other hand, because uh, we saw that on the side of the United States or along the United States, there was Israel. And
Yeah.
Israel has been digging or has been cultivating for a moment like this, a moment when it will be able to attack Iran for some reason. So that is number reason, that is reason number one why it is not surprising. Now, it is also not surprising uh, because Trump had come off a victory, or what he would call a victory, where they attacked Venezuela and they kidnapped the Venezuelan president, President Maduro, from Venezuela, who is currently was kidnapped and is in the United States, is in prison in the United States, to take over the resources of that country, and which is, of course, oil. And which oil, of course, was being supplied, a lot of it, Venezuelan oil, was being supplied to China. And it is important to look at this situation within a geopolitical context, or also in a sense that we look at the resources of the world and how they are being shared and who controls those resources of the world. If we look at Venezuela and Iran, they have two important things which are similar, and that is both of them, they are some of the biggest, they have the biggest reserves of crude oil in the world. Some people say Venezuela has the biggest reserves, next is Saudi Arabia, and then the third one is Iran. So it is, it is only uh, beyond speculation, or it is just precise, if I may say, for someone to think in that direction, that there is a desire by the United States to control all these resources, which are the energy resources of the world. Of course, we are going through a transition whereby we are moving from, from fossil fuels to cleaner energy, but still fossil fuels or hydrocarbons or crude oil is still going to be instrumental in this process even of transfer, because it's not going to happen in one day. So even within the next 50 years, crude oil is still going to play a very important role. We are not just going to shift from fossil fuels and go to cleaner energy. So one would say that there was a desire of the United States to control the resources, or there's that desire for the United States to control the resources in Iran, so that it can be, the biggest supplier. Because if you have control over Saudi Arabia, which they have, someone might say they already have control over Saudi Arabia, and you have now, control over Venezuela, then you have control over Iran. All three of them, they have the biggest energy reserves, and of course, the United States also itself has major, is a major supplier of crude oil. Add that to Canada, so you would see that you have five of the biggest sources of energy globally. This puts you in a position whereby you can put any country to its knees when it comes to the price of oil. You can manipulate the energy, these energy resources, the price of these energy resources, and then any country which is trying to challenge you as the main player, as the hegemony of the world, you are able to bring it to its knees, because they have to come and beg you for these resources. And we have seen this in the past with Japan. The reason why Japan attacked the United States, the so-called Pearl Harbor, is because the United States cut off Japanese source of energy. Japan could not get energy anymore. And so one could say that this is what the United States is trying to repeat with China, that after, if you look at the grand chessboard, you could say that the US is trying to control the five biggest sources of energy, or the biggest reserves of energy in the world, so that it can choke off China, because China is trying to challenge it. China is trying to challenge it on the global stage, whereby if you look at purchasing power, the Chinese economy right now is bigger than that of the United States. Okay, but if you look at per capita, of course, the United States is still bigger. But in purchasing power terms, the Chinese economy is now bigger. In all aspects, the Chinese economy is trying to overtake the United States technologically. We saw artificial intelligence is challenging. They're trying to build their, they're trying to build their aircraft industry, whereby they manufacture their own aircraft. They have surpassed the United States when it comes to the automobile industry. China is now the biggest exporter of automobile, and in this, it has overtaken all the countries were major leaders. Germany, Germany in 20, I think Germany it was in 2023, and Japan in 2024, they overtook Japan as the main exporter of automobiles. And automobiles are a major pillar, industrial pillar in the globe. You have about 3 pillars, which is transportation, that is number 1, which China has overtaken. And now you have energy, which the United States is fighting over. And then you have communication. Communication, this is the reason why Huawei was blacklisted and sanctioned, because China was trying to overtake the United States in that sense. Now, going back to energy, where the struggle is currently, one would not be surprised to say, if I go back to the question which you made, which you posed, one would not be surprised why the United States is trying to, overtake or to attack Iran. Why it attacked Iran? Because this would complete its ambitions of checking China, one, by taking over the energy resources such that China can be in a begging position. And the rest of the world, of course, because we have heard that Japan is also taking, Japan and South Korea and Taiwan, all these countries, they get all their source of energy from the Middle East. 90% of their energy is coming from the Middle East. So you can see that the US is trying to control these resources so that its multinational corporations, its oil companies, can be the ones which are supplying oil, on the global stage. And of course, on the other side, I mentioned Israel. It's not surprising that Israel wants to be the major hegemony, within the Middle East, controlling everyone, controlling whether it is Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and all these countries, the Gulf countries, all of them. So I think in that sense, it is not surprising.
I'm glad we unpacked that, because you definitely brought up fresh perspectives, a build up, United States interests of controlling those 5 major producers of energy. Now let's go back to what I asked originally. So this is what is happening beside the pretense that we are told in the mainstream media, why they go and attack Iran in the name of uranium, this and that, which is not consistent, by the way, the reasons that they are giving every time. Now, why is it important for us to talk about what happens after, especially from our own perspective, from the global south, from Africa? Why should we start to have that conversation right now? Because it's important. We agreed that it's important, but it's good also to discuss it, with our viewers.
Yeah, so I think that it is important to understand that while the US has its plans, and of course Israel, it's important for us to be aware that the fact that they have these plans, it doesn't mean that those plans are going to work out. Mm-hmm. It's just like how the US allowed China, I think in 2011, to join, they allowed China to join the World Trade Organization. They did not anticipate the consequences of that step, because originally they thought that by bringing China into the World Trade Organization, into the mainstream global economy, because China was isolated before, that this would complete the the remaining pieces, would give them the victory of the remaining resistances against the remaining resistances, which we are remaining in the global south as the architects of the neoliberal global order. And by this I mean the order which was created in the 1960s. We remember that after the 1945, the World War II, the United States emerged, after Europe was sinking, the United States emerged as a global superpower who was checking everyone. If you remember the issue of the Suez Canal, that the United States was instrumental in checking Britain and telling it that it should not continue to attack, Egypt, because Egypt, Israel, and France, they had ganged up against Egypt because Egypt had closed the Suez Canal under Abdul Gamal Nasser and say this belongs to us because it is near here. It is not in France. It is not in Israel. It is not in London. This Suez Canal belongs to us. So he thought that they have gained enough. They have exploited enough, even though they are the ones who built it, and it is time that it returned to Egypt. So the United States emerged during that period as the ultimate hegemony, whereby it would check everyone. It would check everyone during. Give me a second here. It would check everyone during that period. So from the 1940s, it consolidated its power because it told Britain and the other European powers that they should give independence to their colonies. And so that is why you see that in the 60s, a lot of Africans and a lot of people were gravitated towards the United States, because this is the language which the United States was speaking and forcing the European countries to give independence to their former colonies. Little did the people know that the United States itself was a colonial power, and it is very few people who saw this. And one of those people, it was Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. That is what led him in 1965 to publish a book called Neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, because for him, he had seen the behavior of the United States in Latin America and what it was doing there, that it was trying to colonize and force other countries under its blanket, under its umbrella. Countries like Cuba, all these countries, Venezuela, it was colonizing them, subtly, okay, discreetly. Somebody, what would you say, discreet? It was using discreet means to control these countries. So Nkrumah feared that the US would do the same thing, even though in public it was speaking the language of decolonization. And of course, he had seen also the US behavior in countries like Philippines, okay, and all these countries where it was colonizing and helping. In some cases, it was helping even the colonial countries. For example, if you look at Vietnam's war against France, the US was giving some help. And later on, we would see that some of the fascist regimes, the US was giving help. Even apartheid itself, the US was against, the government in South Africa, the blacks in South Africa. It was in support of the apartheid regimes. And that's why we are seeing, even today, the US is supporting the apartheid regime in Israel. So many Africans looked at it as, a benevolent power that is coming to help. So it is later on that people started realizing that no, this is an imperialistic country. This country is an imperialistic country later on. So they consolidated their power. After World War II, they consolidated their power with the overthrow of any government which opposed them. And those are the countries which we saw, which later on brought the Iranian Revolution, that the US also participated in overthrowing the democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh in Iran. They led to overthrow of a lot of regimes in Africa, in South America. It was even brutal, much more brutal in South America, Nicaragua, and all these countries. A lot of attempted, coups, in Cuba, whereby they wanted to kill President Castro. A lot of chaos. So it consolidated its power during that period. So it ascended to the throne, and then the 80s, the 90s. So during the period of the 2000s, they thought that they are trying to overtake the remaining resistance, which was China. And they saw that China, they cannot overtake China, they cannot control China anymore with force. Okay, so they wanted to use soft means. And those soft means, it meant even covert means like, sending the CIA to steer up a color revolution in China. They failed to do that because China had built up very strong systems, security systems, investigations within the country, a lot of intelligence within the country. They had built up their military. So it was no more possible to use force to overthrow the Chinese government. So they thought that they would be able to overthrow the Chinese government covertly by allowing China to come into the World Trade Organization in 2011, and later on, say, okay, if the Chinese become very rich, of course they were naive, that if the Chinese become very rich, then the Chinese people would start demanding for democracy, or for the Western form of, I would not say democracy, for a Western form of governance, that this is what would happen. So this is where I say that it does not necessarily mean that if they have plans of, for example, overthrowing the Iranian government and then taking over the oil fields there, the energy resources in the Middle East, complete control, and then have control over the resources in Venezuela, and then chop China off, that this is going to be possible. It doesn't mean that this is going to be possible if they have these plans. So on the other hand, you can look at it and say, there's one way in which this plan may not work, just like what their plan was of overthrowing the Chinese government was in the past, and that plan did not work out as they planned because of overconfidence. And so it is clear even today that they are facing a lot of problems, of course, in China because of the overconfidence. After kidnapping the Venezuelan president, they thought that okay, it will be easy to overthrow the government in Iran and then take over the resources immediately. But it has now taken 3 weeks. In Venezuela, it took 1 day. They went in and kidnapped the president. But in Iran, it is not the case. Even though Israel has been, in Iran cultivating and spying there for almost 20 years, it is still not possible for them, to succeed in this kind of, manner. So we can now see that, or we can say that for the global south, a lot of changes are happening, but there is need for us as a global south people now to change how we think, and especially our leaders. If I may speak precisely, especially our leaders. We have leaders who, still thinking that they're supposed to be taken care of, instead of them,
Yeah.
shattering their own way and saying, let us create a new system. They are so accustomed. It's almost like saying, okay, it's an elephant. I've tied it on a small pole when it is young. It grows around that pole as it tries to pull itself, and it's not able to leave that small pole. It grows thinking that that pole is stronger than it, even when it grows bigger, that it can pull that pole within a second and go off. All right. So this is the situation that we are seeing even in many of global south countries, not just African countries, but even other global south countries who still think that they want to be, under the arm of the United States and the imperialist countries, of Europe, and of course, in one way or another, Japan and all the other countries that want to, perpetuate imperialism.
Interesting. So this is why we need to be prepared. Now let's talk about, I mean, when I say what if Iran wins and what are the impacts of it to the global south, to Africa, to and also I'm also interested to hear specifically to BRICS and to the region, to the West Asia slash Middle East. Now all these things we are going to unpack them. Now, I mean, many analysts are saying, even inside the United States itself, and also even many analysts from Israel who live outside of Israel, there's a heavy censorship there. They are agreeing these aggressors have lost this war. So already, but still, I will ask, what if Iran wins? So if Iran were to win this war, what would that signal about the current global power structure? Would it mark the acceleration of a multipolar world or something more unstable? Let's look
Yeah,
at
so yeah, so
from
the winning, Iran, I think that would not win necessarily as in defeating the United States, because that is very difficult. The United States is an extremely powerful country, and combined with Israel, they have
extremely
tremendous.
powerful in what? Like
Yeah,
militarily?
in all aspects, even economically,
Okay.
Iran cannot withstand, okay, cannot withstand the power of the United States, whether outlasting it economically or militarily. It cannot, because Iran does not have enough industrial power or economic power to take on the United States, like conventionally in conventional war. But
Okay.
but I can tell you that the reason why Iran can win, and is not winning in a sense that they have come direct to each other. They have come to face each other direct in combat. That Iran is going to win. It is not in that sense, but there is a way in which Iran can carry out war, which is what they call, asymmetric war, unconventional war. Iran can only fight an unconventional war. It's just like if you read a book called David and Goliath, this gentleman who is called Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called David and Goliath. He said that the reason, if you go back to these Bible stories, he said that the reason why uh, this story of David and Goliath is relevant to when a very powerful force comes up against a smaller force and they are going to fight. The reason they cannot fight on the same terms, if the smaller force wants to win or a smaller individual wants to win, the reason they cannot fight on the same terms is because the smaller force cannot manage the weapons, which cannot manage to have the weapons which the bigger force possesses. For example, I'll give you an example that if we go to Afghanistan, the US had all these planes, aircraft carriers, docked in the Gulf. And all these military bases are, in the Gulf, whether in Qatar, where it has its biggest military base, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all these, and they were against the Afghanistan. So the Taliban. So the best the Taliban could do is not to face the United States, right on in combat, but they had to use other means, what they call asymmetric means of war, whereby you come and hit and run, all the so-called guerrilla tactics. Okay, you use the geography because you understand the geography very well, and then you use tactics which favor you. Don't use tactics which favor your enemy, because your enemy has overwhelming power. If you try to face them as a group and you say the United States is standing there and we, the Taliban, are standing here, let us face each other in combat, you can't win it like that, because they will just come with one piece of bomb and drop on you, and they clear all your group. So what you do, then you divide yourself, and then you attack in different ways. And the contradictions within the United States at home, because this is why it is very important to heed to the advice which Sun Tzu says in his book, The Art of War, that know, if you want to win a war, know thyself and know thy enemy. Okay? So many people have capitalized, even the Taliban, in one way or another. They have prolonged the war and looked at the United States system within the country, that you have changing presidents within the United States. So now, having that you have changing presidents within the United States, the political system has different parties. These parties, somehow, they have a little bit of different agendas and how they look at things. So this helps you to adjust it, because, for example, the Taliban, you fought for over 20 years, but in the United States, the governments were changing, and these governments always have a way of looking at things. I'll give you an example in this also, that the Biden administration, many analysts have said that the Biden administration was forced by Netanyahu to attack Iran, and it refused. It refused to attack. But when Trump came, due to certain weaknesses, and other people have said because of the Epstein files, Trump, of course, is clearly within the, is in the Epstein files. So it is possible that Israel has some, something on him, and they're manipulating him, which was not possible with people like Biden. It was not, possible to force Biden's hand to go to war, because maybe they did not have anything on Biden. All right, and now Trump comes in, they have something on him. So it is easier for them to manipulate this guy and push him into war, so that he can do whatever they want. So this is the situation, that these changing policies or these changing presidents, they come with their own issues, their own outlook of what the political system should be doing, or the institutions should be doing. So the enemy, the so-called enemy, or you who is fighting, you are also supposed to study with what is happening within the United States itself. For example, if you are the Taliban, you're supposed to study what is going on in the United States to know how you can also adjust your military tactics. And this goes back to what I said about Sun Tzu, where he says, know thyself and know thy enemy. Know thyself, but also, so know thyself basically means that know that you cannot face the enemy outright, because he's more powerful than you, he has more resources, but you also exploit his weaknesses. So this is what Malcolm Gladwell wrote about in that book, David and Goliath. And he said that the reason David could not fight, because they say they would give him a weapon, an armor, Saul's armor, so that he can use it to fight against Goliath. And the armor was so heavy that David, as a small person, could not afford to carry this armor and a big sword. So he used his own weapon, which he knew very well, which was a sling. So he told them that they should remove the armor. He cannot have, So, and Goliath had a armor, he had a head cover, on him, he had a big sword. All right. So this guy had everything. He was a warrior, not only warrior who fought battles. But David then realized that he could not face him on those terms, whereby he's putting on also armor. He cannot swing this big sword, which belongs to the King Saul. So he said they should remove it, and then they should give him his sling. He could afford to use his sling. So with the stone, he was able to find a way of hitting him with a single stone, which went through his skull and cracked the head, even without using a big sword. So you can see this is a demonstration of what Iran could do, that they would not fight on the same terms. And we have seen this already, of course, happening, that Iran now, he said, I will attack the countries which are supporting the United States within the region, okay, to make the situation unbearable for them. And we are seeing this, that the attack on the energy resources within the region is leading to the skyrocketing of the price of crude oil. And then we are seeing that the price of gas, LPG, natural gas, has gone up. Why? Because Qatar has shut down the gas plants, or they are operating below capacity. In Saudi Arabia, some of the refineries, the biggest refinery was shut down. Okay, so this has led to the skyrocketing of crude oil and energy resources. In Europe, they have started suffering. The energy resources have gone up by 50%. Okay, so now when you are fighting this kind of war, then those surrounding the United States are the ones who will put pressure on the United States to stop. Remember, we had a discussion in the past where I told you that the people who put pressure on Britain to stop the war, during the Suez Canal crisis, it was the United States. Why? It's because the United States was losing trade, within this canal. So it put pressure on them because it is a major maritime trade route. Okay, so it needed goods to pass through, energy resources to pass through, to go to Europe and come also to the United States, trade from Asia. Okay, so it was being affected. So it was necessary for it to force Britain, France, and Israel to stop the war because it could not afford the interruption of trade. Now, this is what we are also seeing, that with Iran's attack, it could win in that sense, but it is not necessarily that it would win an outright face off with the United States, but it would win in the sense that, just like the Suez Canal crisis, that Egypt did not win outright, but it won because they bombarded Egypt's air force and they leveled it to the ground. They bombarded because it was a combination of Britain, France, and Israel together, working together. Israel came and seized even the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and then they came and bombed the air force. They came and bombed Egypt's navy. They destroyed almost the whole of Egypt's military. All right, but Egypt still emerged out the winner in this war. Why? Because of the pressure other players who were being affected put on these guys who are the aggressors to withdraw from the war. So this is likely this is what is likely to happen even in this situation, whereby as Iran attacks these energy resources, closes off the Strait of Hormuz, and interrupts trade and the energy resources, the price of energy resources go up, then these players in the Middle East, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all these countries in the Middle East, they'll put pressure on the US and Israel and say it has to stop. And we have started seeing this. Yesterday, the Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the war is almost coming, is going to come to a conclusion, is about to come to a conclusion. Very soon it may stop. So we are seeing this pressure. And why we are seeing this is that Iran is using asymmetric means of war. Israel came and attacked, Iran's gas fields. Iran also attacked, energy resources of Saudi Arabia and I think Qatar, and also attacked, Israel's refinery, okay, and the port. So this is what is going to happen, that attack on, or it has to be asymmetric. It has to be, covert, some sort of covert. It is not going to be, an outright battle facing each other, even though it may escalate to that point. So Iran may win in that sense, if I may give a background to your question. And what are the consequences, of course?
Yeah, so when it wins, now
Yes.
Iran is demonstrated as this resisting hegemony in the global south. So what does it send? A message
I think that is the right word. If Iran is able to resist long, I think that is the precise word, the word you've used, that if Iran is able to resist completely the takeover or the overthrow of its government, what is likely to happen? Of course, what is likely to happen that I see here, I think it's the Minister of Energy in Qatar yesterday said that rebuilding the gas plant and bringing it back on board for it to start functioning may take about 5 years. All right, this is what he said. Okay, that is the Qatar Minister of Energy. This is what he mentioned. Now, it may take some time for the global economy, to come back on board. But also what we see is that the United States may withdraw. It may not completely withdraw from the Middle East, but its role, it will drastically reduce its role in the Middle East. And if it reduces its role in the Middle East, it means that everyone now is going to be on their own in the Middle East. Everyone is likely to be on their own. We know that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, of course, they are an item. They mostly work together. We see that Qatar is likely to gravitate towards, to continue to gravitate. Of course, it already has some cooperation with Iran, and even they share a gas field. One of the gas fields is shared between Qatar and Iran. So Qatar is likely to gravitate much more towards Iran, and maybe Israel. Israel also would gravitate a little bit more towards the United Arab Emirates and Israel, so that they can continue to work together. So there will be a little bit more division in the Middle East. But of course, the beneficiaries of this withdrawal are likely to be the global South, because China will continue to invest in other countries. It will come back to invest much more and get its resources. Europe, of course, is likely to continue to survive also to get these resources from the Middle East, because that is where it gets most of its natural gas that is currently consuming, having lost access to the gas in Russia, whereby it boycotted itself the gas in Russia. No one said that they should boycott that gas. And Africa, of course, is likely to have some breathing space, but that breathing space will only be important if if a new leadership arises on the African continent, or the existing leadership realizes the times we are in, that these are new times whereby everyone is supposed to look out for themselves, which is, of course, unlikely looking at the current type of leadership that we have on the African continent. So this is what I anticipate in the next 5 to 10 years.
I like pop-up questions, and this is what makes us, I think, unique here at Connect Africa. We like to have conversations, not really limited to the question, so that we know what we can from our guests. I see here a comment or / a question from our viewer at Ruski Partisan. He commented that when you said Benjamin Netanyahu or Bibi has announced that the war is coming to a conclusion. And I actually what? Really? I didn't come across that news, but something unexpected, because this will leave them, whatever the conclusion is, if it is as it is now, they are losers. And I doubt if they are going to accept that. In fact, there are nuclear options are even on the table, they have been saying. So let me just ask you, even if it's not planned, how did you translate that when he says the war is coming to a conclusion? Are they accepting that they have lost, or they are going to go and bluff some kind of saying, "Oh, okay, the victory is ours"?
No, I think that they have used up most of the weapons which they had, and so they don't really have a lot of, for example, interceptors. We have heard that Israel is censoring what is coming out of the East country. That when it is hit by Iran, it doesn't allow its soldiers to, it doesn't allow the population. So they are censoring all the damage that is being done. But in the past, we have seen that Iran's missiles are hitting much more, in Israel. So they are censoring what is happening right now, because Iran is hitting much more, is becoming much more successful. And yesterday, also, it was mentioned that Iran tested some intercontinental ballistic missiles, which it fired, and they moved about 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers from Iran to Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is an African island, which belongs to Mauritius, but is currently being colonized and occupied by the United States and Britain. So Iran, so it is being used as a military base. They removed actually the citizens from that country, all the people from that country, the African people from Diego Garcia, and they sent them to Mauritius. So those people are supposed to go back, but That is what Britain did, and then it gave the island. It leased the island to the United States. So Iran fired a missile. I think they said they fired 2 missiles from Iran towards the Indian Ocean, because this island actually is in the Indian Ocean, all the way down here to where Mauritius is. So they fired a missile there, and a few days ago also we heard that the United States aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln left the Gulf and went back to the United States. But remember, Iran had said that they hit that aircraft carrier.
Yes.
So it shows you that the military resources are dwindling. And that is why we are hearing this language from both Netanyahu and Trump, that the war looks like it will come to an end very soon. So this is what we are anticipating. But this does not really mean that they are going to stop, carrying out covert operations and means of trying to overthrow the government in Iran. They will continue to do that. We saw what happened with the government in Syria, that even though the government in Syria held out for almost 10 years, they continued to agitate and finance Al-Qaeda. Even the current president in Syria right now was a member of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who I've heard that he's even visiting the White House very soon. So they will continue, causing chaos in this kind of manner. The CIA will continue causing chaos in this kind of manner. So it doesn't mean that if they retreat, that they would have stopped agitating for the overthrow of the government in Tehran. So these words from Netanyahu and President Trump, of course, they signal that they want to reset. And that is why Iran also knows this, and it has said that it is not going to stop attacking. Because previously, when they attacked Iran, that's what they said, that they wanted to negotiate. Israel had run out of ammunition, and then they restocked, and this is the second time they have attacked now Iran. So Iran knows this very well, that if they are engaging this kind of talk, Iran also has to continue, attacking and weakening, its, the United States and Israel's partners within the Gulf, so that it will not get these kind of attacks again for the third time.
Yeah, they said this attack, this war will end in their terms. They will not allow it to end in the aggressor's terms. That's what they said. Well, now let's go back to our discussion. So when Iran wins, what happens, right? So we did discuss, you gave us to the global south how they need to be watching, and even bringing a historical background to it. Now let's look at specifically BRICS. Now BRICS is it's an alternative economical bloc. In fact, if we look at what it has, it's even much more powerful than the other economic bloc, or the G7. So what kind of change it will bring? How will it affect when Iran wins? What does it mean to BRICS? How would an Iranian victory affect its credibility, cohesion, meaning BRICS credibility, cohesion, and influence? I mean, if I am frank, right now it's like a toothless organization. It can't be some of its because not all the founders or members are really strictly committed the way Russia and China are committed to it. Even the founding members, they kind of play both sides. But anyway, when Iran wins, do you think this will change?
So they say, you spoke about the lack of commitment to BRICS. I think they say that countries play to interests. And you remember that when we had a summit in China, that we saw Prime Minister Modi of India and Putin hugging, shaking their hands, of course, walking hand in hand. And we saw good conversations between President Xi Jinping of China and Modi and President Putin. But later on, we would see that India's prime minister would later on acquiesce to the demands of the United States to stop buying Russian oil.
Yeah.
Of course, this is because countries pander only to their own interests and what is going
And
to
not to
benefit.
forget, it was just right after Modi's visit, they
Yes,
have
yes.
attacked.
These countries pander to their interests and not anyone's interest, and what is of course good for their people, and this is likely to happen, and that is why we have seen also that Trump has removed sanctions from Russia, so that Russian oil can flow within the international energy market, so that the price of oil, crude oil, can come down a little bit, because so as yesterday, by yesterday, the price of crude oil, the barrel, had gone to 110 US dollars, even though it came from around 65 before the war. The price was around $65. Right now it is around 110. So what this means is that we are seeing countries take matters in their own hands. For example, India has had some party negotiations with Iran, whereby some of its vessels which are carrying liquefied natural gas are allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. China has already negotiated with the government in Tehran, and some of its vessels are allowed to pass through, while Iran is insisting that the United States and its allies, its vessels, will not be allowed. And actually, Iran has said that the Strait of Hormuz is open, is only closed to the United States and its allies. So India, China, they are. So what this means is that also these guys, as they continue in this direction, we could see BRICS emerge, not as as a toothless dog, as you said, but we could see it emerge as a strong alternative. The withdrawal, or the partial withdrawal, of the United States from the Middle East would strengthen this relationship between India, China, Russia, and this would strengthen actually BRICS, so that it will emerge as an alternative to these Western-led institutions, because they already have, I think, the New Development Bank and the Asian. I think Asian is called the Asian Infrastructure Bank, which are two banks already, which are led by China, and then we would see other institutions being created which are led by the BRICS countries, and which would be, of course, very good for the global south. So Russia will continue to play a major role. We would see China, continue to play a major role, and BRICS would generally be strengthened, and we would see India continue to play a major role. And if Iran also survives this, we know that these four major BRICS countries will emerge out stronger, and they'll create what we would call a new world order, from the one which was created in 1940, after 1945. And this will be accelerated actually by the fact that the United States has partially withdrawn from the Middle East, but also because the United States has undermined its own institutions, which it led the world in creating after World War II in 1945. You have seen that the United States has withdrawn from most of the institutions. It has undermined the United Nations and said that it's useless, withdrawn from the World Health Organization. It has withdrawn from most of the United Nations organizations and undermined these institutions. So this may lead to the creation of new institutions. Of course, this has already happened with the creation of I think, the Asia Infrastructure Bank, which many countries have joined, including a lot of, European countries, many of them, including Britain and all the other, German, they have joined this bank, and that bank is based in China. And of course, then the New Development Bank, which is currently having at the head of its presidency, a former, Brazilian president. So you could see that this could change, and it could give, BRICS more say, and it could give it more strength and make it more relevant.
am I dreaming, or am I in fantasy? Because when Iran's authorities have announced, first it was closed, and then they said they will allow it for a non-US and Israel allies, and then they said those who are doing their oil transaction other than US dollar. There were all these developments within 1 week. So now with that, don't you say when that comes, oh, okay, I mean, this choke point is responsible for 1/5 of energy supply to the world. Those who are members of BRICS, okay, founding members, and the other one who have been accepted in the past 2 years, okay, if that is allowed, jump in. Anyway, we have BRICS, which encourages, to transact with our local currencies. Can we make a deal with this and that? Don't Wasn't that supposed to happen? But instead, we see, I mean, no reaction. This is what I say. It's likely betrayed by its own members, meaning uh, BRICS. Yeah, and you can comment
You
on
know,
this. The other one is my question. Do you think those powerful one who have the seat also in the permanent United Nations Security Council, China and Russia, how far are they likely to go to back Iran? Or is it simply in their best interest to protect Iran?
yeah, of course. Let me start with that question. Of course, it is in their best interest, because remember that all this pressure, it is in China's interest for the government in Iran to survive. Uh, because of, remember what I told you in the beginning, the United States seeks the control over those resources, and if it has control over those resources, that is likely not to be very good news for both Russia and China, because if it has control, if the US has control over the resources, the three biggest oil reserves in the world, that is Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Iran, it is likely to be very, very bad news for China and and of course Russia. So definitely China is playing a part, is sharing some intelligence, and Russia is also sharing some intelligence. And of course, we have had this even the secretary of the so-called secretary of war of the United States, Peter Hegseth, warning Russia and China that they should stop sharing intelligence with Russia. News came out, in broad daylight, where they say that Russia is sharing, targets, the location of U.S. ships and military bases that Russia has been sharing. And of course, Russia did not deny this. It has been sharing, location with Iran. So this has been actually happening. So it is within the interest of China. Just like what you are seeing that is happening in Ukraine, that China has been supporting Russia, not directly though, but with the parts to assemble drones, and then buying Russian oil to support the Russian economy so that the Russian economy can continue. So it is in the interest of China, of course, to have Russia, the Russian government, to continue to stand. And it would alarm it, very much, if the government in Russia was about to be overthrown. Because remember that China doesn't want an hostile regime, a regime which is hostile to its political system in Russia, because China shares a border with Russia, remember. So definitely China, being the one who buys 90% of Iran's oil at a discounted price, would not want the United States to take over those energy resources, because they would push the prices of those. They would manipulate definitely the prices of those resources, like what I said, to hurt China, and of course, in one way also to hurt Russia. They would flood, maybe in one way or another, flood the world with resources to cripple Russia. They will flood the world market with oil, since they control the biggest oil oil reserves, the three biggest oil reserves. They would be controlling the three biggest oil reserves. They would flood the market with oil and cripple the Russian economy after defeating Russia. Then they would move to Asia, whereby after putting a regime they desire in Russia and defeating maybe Putin or the group, the political group in Russia, then they will take control over those resources, push their multinational companies within Russia so that they can extract the value, from the Russian oil industry. And that value, of course, will go to the United States. Now, with that, having their multinational companies in Russia, it means now they are ready to push the price up of the crude oil because they know that all the value will be coming to them since you have your own companies. Because right now, it would not benefit them very much to push the price of crude up if it is not a very difficult situation like what we are facing now. Because right now, they are not the ones who are forcing the price of crude oil to go up. It is Iran now who's forcing that price of crude oil to go up. And this is also having an effect on, on the United States, on the citizens in the United States, the Americans. And this, of course, would affect Trump politically and his group. And so this is what I said when we are opening, that know thyself and know thy enemy. So this is a game which has to be played both ways. So if the US manages to take over those resources, it will manipulate in such a way, and then later on push the price up to extract value from both Russia and China, and almost collapse China's economy, because China needs right now China is the biggest importer of crude oil globally. So it would want to force China's cost of energy to go up, and then the cost of production, to go up of all these goods, the cost of industrialization to go up, and then force it downwards. So this is the whole grand strategy of what is, of course, happening. And of course, we hope that Iran is able to hold out longer so that they are not able to succeed in this adventure.
Trump likes to make, that transactional peace deal. Do you think, is there any slightest way that he can make that transactional peace of deal, which will be, of course, claimed as a victory from US and Israel side, by having that deal with US and Russia? For example, Russia is facing sanction, being out of the SWIFT payment system, this and that, war with Ukraine. What are the things that he can leverage on to make these countries, backstab Iran? I'm not saying underestimating, by the way, Iran's resistance here. I'm sure they know, every country know they are by their own, as you said. But yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, let me close on the first point, that this arrangement where countries in BRICS currently have gone to have their own deals with Iran, is as a result of where we are currently. Because remember, this war began just about 3 weeks ago. Okay, it is not yet there. Even in the transition, if you are talking about the fact that the United States as a global hegemony, he's declining, it doesn't mean that it's going to decline in 3 weeks. It takes time. It takes almost about 10 to 15 years, even sometimes up to 20 years. So with the events of the last 3 weeks, these ones are just the beginning of that process. So all these countries cannot align, the formation of the institutions that will be able to replace that system, which is led by the United States and Europe, cannot form within those 3 weeks. So these can be looked at as short-term fixes. So if the things reach, the situation reaches somewhere where they are seeing that the United States has completely withdrawn, for example, from the Middle East, and is going internally, that's going to focus on its own internal contradiction, internal issues, then that is when you would see that BRICS and its institutions now start to emerge, and these countries start to realize that, guys, we have to get our act together. And if you see Russia and China, they have become more close, and then India is also realizing that no, the order, just from what is happening, that they are able to negotiate their own deals, then they will realize that no, we really need to form other institutions, because these institutions which were created after World War II have collapsed. You know, they are almost collapsed. The guys who led them, they don't care about them anymore, and some of the guys have withdrawn. Why don't we shape our own institutions, like what we have already started, and then move in that direction and give the global south a better, option compared to what existed, which was almost for a new form of colonialism. So that shaping is still happening. It's not going to happen within 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and say, oh, why is everyone now organizing, their own deals with Iran? Why don't they go together as, as BRICS? So that process will take time. It can even take up to 5 years for them to realize this. Remember that after, World War II, 1945, 1947, all these, even when the colonial people started agitating, for example, in the Gold Coast, 1957, this after the formation of the Bretton Woods, institutions, it took almost 10 years before countries like Ghana got their independence in 1957. So you can see this period, all this period, 1945, 1946, 47, all the way took almost a period of 7 years. So it doesn't happen, in 1 week or 2 weeks, for these things to form themselves. What was the other question you asked? The before I came back to this.
Is there any possibility that Trump?
Yeah. Trump, you said what would Trump leverage on? I think that Russia, like even if striking a deal with Russia, I think Russia is not like the Western countries. Russia is a little bit more principled, that it has a position. If it holds a position, it holds it a little bit. It is unlikely that Russia would betray its relationship with Iran or its relationship with China for benefits. I mean, it has happened in the past whereby Russia gravitated towards the West, and this is what led to a conflict actually between the Soviet Union and and China, whereby they had a short disagreement, but this consequently, I think the Russians learned from it, because consequently it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union when they tried to go the direction of the West. So I think that Russia learned from this. So Russia is unlikely to have any kind of deal that compromises, I think, its relationship with Iran and China, because already it knows the playbook from which these Western countries led by the United States are playing from. And Russia itself having this conflict, in Ukraine, whereby the West is fighting against Russia, it is unlikely that they will be able to compromise with Donald Trump. And I don't think the politicians in Russia, they have very much regard for Donald Trump. They don't look at him as someone who's really very smart. They don't really look at him that way.
Okay, now so that brings us to bring the issue to home, to Africa. The economic, security, diplomacy, and autonomy when Iran wins this war. So for Africa, this is not just a distant war, although the way we are acting or reacting to this seems that way. It has real implications. All households, our kitchen, have been knocked down because we use electric gas, and then also the transport system. So if Iran wins, how might that reshape Africa's geopolitical options, economic partnerships, and bargaining power on the global stage?
Yeah, so for the African continent, I would like very much to be optimistic about the situation of the continent, But to be honest, the situation is very, hopeless, if I may say. But there is still some hope. There's always hope, from especially the young generation. And there is a chance, like I said, there's a huge opportunity for us to charter a new direction and unhinge ourselves from the Western controls. And of course, that means their political controls and also the economic controls. Because without controlling our politics, they would not have managed to control our economies. It is simply because they control our politics, political systems. They implanted, to be precise, they just implanted their political systems, which are easy to control, from the metropolis in London, Paris, and Washington and Brussels. They just put those political systems here so that they can control them from there, and then hence control the economies of the continent. So what this means is that even if they talk about, for example, privatization or the so-called liberalization of economies, or reforming of economies and liberalization of economies, they really don't want the emergence of a middle class, a very strong middle class in the African continent, or if I may say, in the global south. If there's any emergent middle class or business class or capitalistic class, they did not want the emergence of a capitalistic class in these countries, the colonial countries, because these classes would be competing with their own. And I will give you an example of Aliko Dangote. You can see that they fought him very much, but you can see that it is moments such as these that require the presence of Aliko Dangote, that the oil has almost been cut off from the Middle East. Everyone now is looking for these energy resources. Now, all of a sudden, Dangote becomes very important. I saw an article today
Yeah.
in Bloomberg where they say that African countries are turning to Dangote for their, energy resources, and that is why. And why is that? That is simply because most of the energy resources now, there's competition over these resources. The problem now is not the price. The problem is availability of these resources. Now, all of a sudden, the people, the corrupt capitalistic class in Africa, which used to import these goods from outside, now don't have access to these, because they will know the capitalists in these metropolis, they will not give them these goods. They will not get, for example, this refined oil to bring it. So now this is where Dangote becomes now very important, and his battle becomes very critical. That now we see the importance of us having these industries, whether it is automobile, whether it is what it is. It has never been important, to see the creation of our own, private sector as important as today. And the example, of course, of that is Dangote himself. That now the refinery which everyone has been fighting against, both the Europeans have been fighting against it, the international oil companies have been fighting against it, the corrupt capitalistic class, petty bourgeois class in Nigeria, and of course all the other African countries have been fighting against. Now they are seeing that this refinery now all of a sudden is important. All right. So there is that opportunity. That is where we need to be a little bit optimistic. I know that I said that I'm short of optimism when it comes to the African continent, but that is where then we need to be optimistic and, of course, continue to push in that direction. But the situation in Africa is very difficult. It's very difficult when you look at it, but there's hope as long as there's a new generation of young people who can come on board. Of course, there is always hope that the direction can be changed. But for Africa, the direction has to be changed in a lot of things, starting with the political system. Because without overhauling the political system and changing direction, of where the continent is going currently, whereby we supplant it with the new political system in the continent, it is unlikely that we will be able to achieve the prosperity that we desire as Africans and which we are looking for. Of course, it is very unlikely that we will be able to do that. And of course, that will not happen within one generation. It may not happen within one generation. Even though it can happen, it may not happen within one generation.
It reminds me of it. It has been in my mind to make this kind of content. I just have to sit down and compose the right thing. When Ethiopia launched the construction of this mega dam called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, it was in 2011, and that time it was the Arab Spring, and it used it when all the focus was on the Arab Spring. That's when they have put the first stone of the launching of the dams, and after that they have announced that definitely Ethiopia has used that time to emerge. I mean, if it didn't do, if the Arab Spring wasn't there, or any kind of thing that engaged all those Arab countries, then it might have been difficult for it to. I don't know when it would have had done it. So this reminds me now what's happening. I don't know if there is any other potential country or head of state or leader in the continent who has this kind of plan, for example, the potential, the capacity to launch such industry, but could not do it because of the pressure of the neo-colonial powers. So this would have been the time to do that because their focus is somewhere else. But as you said, I have a little hope. For example, the Alliance of the Sahel States. What would you have liked to see from those countries, or any capable country within the continent, seizing the opportunity?
Yeah, so definitely, I think the Alliance of Sahel States represents that hope. Is a representation of that hope and optimism that we should have in the continent. It's very good that you mentioned how Ethiopia built the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. That you had this Arab Spring, you had chaos in Egypt, and so there was no one to disturb, Ethiopia during that period when it was trying to build. And so even today, it is, I think, necessary to look at the institutions, the enterprises that would help us as Africa to take off, or at least push further than where we are. And I believe that one of those key projects that we need to work on, or enterprise that we need to work on, is a continental railway platform. Number two, we need to lay, a continental communication platform which would link all the continent. And then we also need to double our energy output. Even if we stopped everything else that we were doing today, and all of us focus our energies on these three key, these key three projects, whereby we double our energy on this African continent from the current 250 gigawatts to around 500 gigawatts. It will help this continent, because this is the very foundation of industrialization. If you're talking about industrialization, just to give you a little bit of some figures. Africa's share of international GDP is less than 3%. We are at $3.5 trillion, or approximately $4 trillion. You can say $4 trillion out of more than $120 trillion of global economy. So this is a representation of our productivity. Our productivity is just 3% of global productivity. Yet we contribute about 19% of the global economy. So this shows you that Africa's economy should be around $19 trillion, all right? Africa's economy should be around $19 trillion because we contribute about 19% of global economy. Just to give you some context, the US's economy is close to 20%, more than 20% of global economy, and their population is just 5%. So Africa is way below when it comes to productivity. China is almost matching. China is matching its population because its population is about 1.4 billion people, which is about 19%, almost the same as Africa. And their share of global economy is about 20%, 19 to 20%. So for them, they are matching, the productivity is matching with their population. So, but China laid a strong foundation. If you look at their energy output right now, I think they are about 1,800 gigawatts of power, and we are at 250. So we are not even a quarter of what China is producing in terms of energy. So that is the genesis of all this industrialization that we are seeing in China. They are able to have this industrialization because they have taken care of things like producing energy. Because if you're talking about industries, how are you going to power them if you are not producing energy? So the first thing, one of the first things that the African continent has to do is double up the energy output that we have on this continent, so that the child in Sierra Leone can have access to light, so that an entrepreneur in Liberia can have access to the African market through the railway platform that we are talking about, that we are able to build a railway platform. An entrepreneur in Senegal, in Mauritania, can have access to all the African market from the west to the east and from the south to the north. This would open up the whole African economy, and within 10 years, Africa will double. Almost every 10 years, we will be able to double our economy and catch up with the rest of the world. Within a period of less than 20 years, we can reach the full potential of what we are supposed to. And so if you lay a fiber optic cable across the African continent, you integrate the communication so that people can communicate with each other. You lay a railway platform whereby goods now can be moved from the west to the east, to the south, and to the north. And then you have given people access to energy. People want to build cold towers whereby people want to start businesses, industries, small businesses. All these, they are going to survive on the back of accessible electricity and cheap and accessible electricity, cheap means of transportation to move the goods across the continent, and then cheap communication, whereby our communication doesn't have to go, through you. This is when you can talk about African Continental Free Trade market, all right, Africa Continental Free Trade area, which we normally talk about. But right now, the African Continental Free Trade area does not really mean much because the base has not been laid. There's no way you're going to move goods from Sierra Leone and move them to East Africa. If you want to move maybe groundnuts from Senegal, or you want to move them from Sierra Leone or Liberia and move those groundnuts and send them to Kenya, there's no way you're going to move them. Why?
Even the industry itself is not there.
Yes, so you are not going to be able to move these things, whether from Gambia, and so it is not possible. So we have to relook at all these things, and this is the direction where the continent now needs to be looking at and say, okay, amid this chaotic situation across the world, we have enough capital. We have $3.5 trillion of economy, of the African economy. This money can be, this is enough capital to be mobilized to build this infrastructure that we are talking about, while the world is fighting against each other in this chaotic situation. A few days ago, I was watching the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, Wamkele Mene. Mr. Wamkele Mene, he was being interviewed by DW, which is Deutsche Welle from Germany, and they are questioning him on these things, why people are not seeing what's happening with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And the reason is simple, is because, and of course he was defending himself that these things take time and all these, of course we have to be politically correct, but of course it may not be up to him, but it may be from the frustrations at the political level, because these decisions, the African Union or the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as a sub-institution of the African Union, and which African Union itself doesn't make its institutions, it has its power, enshrined within the heads of state. So all these decisions of liberalization, of so-called, integrating of the market, as are embedded within the heads of state of the African continent, the 55 heads of African government. So these guys are the ones who are supposed to implement these things. So if they frustrate you, then nothing is going to happen. So these are the things, in the midst of these chaos that is going on around the world, while these imperialistic powers are, focused somewhere else. This is the very moment that we are supposed to be building this, when we should focus our forces and use the capital that we have, use the more than $100 billion of remittances that are coming into the continent within a period of 10 years. Even if we take it by 10%, we tax it by 10%, not even taxing it, but taking it as an investment, urging the diaspora to invest their 10% out of this $100 billion. In the next 10 years, we will build some of these, projects, and have the continent take over and start doubling. After every 5 years, we will start even doubling. In some cases, we can even do it in 2 years and start doubling Africa's economy from 3.5 to 7 trillion, from 7 trillion. We would go on like that. If we are growing at 20%, we are growing 15 to 20% for a period of 10 years, we should be able to more than double the African economy and move forward very rapidly and be able to give a decent life to all African people, on the continent. But of course, what stands in the way of that is the political level and the bureaucracy that is there, and the way they are accustomed to the old system, of course, which is dying. And some of them, they don't know that it is dying. Some of them know that it is dying, but they don't know what to do. Okay. And so these are the complexities. That is why I say that it is very difficult. Africa's situation is very difficult because people like us who know what to do meet a lot of blockages. You meet a lot of bureaucracy. Like, for example, since 2023, when I made a presentation to the African Continental Free Trade Area about a railway platform, up to now, I'm still struggling to get through to make another presentation. So this has been like 2 to 3 years now, is down the road. I've not been able to go there to make another presentation. So you find that people who know what to do and have these ideas of what should be done, they are blocked from, carrying out these important projects, that they have to struggle, even to implement these important projects that would have helped the continent to leapfrog the current system of neo-colonialism and move forward, into prosperity. So these are the big challenges that we see right now, even though we have where we see that the continent should be moving forward, from on going, forward, looking at the opportunity that is there, at the moment, when everyone else is focused on the chaos around the world, in the Middle East and everywhere else.
With that, you can say, so Africa is missing the opportunity.
I can't say it is missing the opportunity yet. Like I said, these things have just started happening. This shift is we are just entering the shift itself. If you remember, President Xi Jinping's visit to, I think, to Moscow, it was in 2023 or 2024, he mentioned that we are witnessing changes we have never seen in 100 years, the changes we are seeing today. So President Xi Jinping, these are the key players in the field right now, in these changes that we are talking about, the global changes. So if he mentions this, you just know that it is happening. So we are just entering that phase. So you can't conclude that, we have missed the opportunity. Maybe after 10 years, 10, 15 years, maybe if nothing changes within the African continent, maybe that is when we'll conclude that, there's nothing really we can do about it and we have missed the opportunity.
How do you explain how Africa is responding to this? I was asking this the other day to David, if there any psychoanalysis explanation. Once again, it looks like we are just waiting, hand folded, while we can use the opportunity.
Yeah,
Perhaps
definitely.
to see who emerges powerful, and then to create an alliance with that powerful country. I don't know, but how do you even explain this?
Yeah, so in one way, I feel sorry for ourselves, and that is why I said that in one way or another, our situation is kind of hopeless. But at the same time, there's hope. Because if you have been told for a very long time, for more than 100 years, that you are nothing, you are disregarded even at the United Nations. I mean, you reach a point where you give up and you are like, you know, I'm nothing. So there's nothing I can contribute to to the global crisis and whatever is happening there, because everything you have to beg, we have to beg for a seat at the United Nations Security Council for more than 60 years. I mean, these things, we started talking about them way back when Nkrumah was there. He's the one who started initiating this conversation that Africa should get a permanent seat, I should get a permanent seat on the United Nations Permanent Security Council.
Mhm.
But it was not done. For more than 60 years. We were begging. So, I mean, South Africa, I think, spoke about this. It is South Africa who spoke about this. Put a voice in there, just like what it did. South Africa did that because it is one of the countries which have a very strong foreign policy on the African continent. Since South Africa, it has the strongest, actually, foreign policy on the African continent. I think it tried to double in into this conflict and say that he's willing to mediate. I think I had something like that. But even we remember the Russia-Ukraine war, that South Africa led a delegation of the African Union in trying to mediate. Yeah, so there was those attempts. Those attempts have been there, but they have not been enough, because we are not really strong enough. We are not consequential, and of course, you can say that it's because of the divisions. These divisions don't make us any stronger that exist within our continent. If we had our economy compounded together, we are speaking with a single voice of $3.5 trillion. I think it would be consequential, somehow consequential. But with that being said, where we are, I think India would be, you know, would be more consequential than us, because it has a bigger population and also it has a bigger economy. So the divisions are not helping us. They are really not helping us, and it will take time until we have reached that point where we have unified as a continent and we have understood that there's power in this unification, in this working together. There's the power of us being able to build our infrastructure and fast track, our development, and then also share in the resources. Instead of fighting against each other, we could share these resources which we have, and reroute where they are needed, send them where they are needed, and share in them, instead of us fighting, against each other to have access to these resources. Until we understand this, that all these salvation is within us and is within working together. The rest of the world, most of the things that we do and say, even if we attempt to say something, and of course we did that even during the Russia-Ukraine war. You saw what happened, that when we attempted to put our voice in there, even a small country like Ukraine and Poland, they disregarded our resources. They mistreated us even when we went there to try to say something. So even in this war, our voice would be inconsequential. Why? Because we have not put our own house in order. We have not really understood. We have not yet understood the power of us working together and first building a viable, economy which will be able to compete globally. So it is unlikely that we will be listened to. And I mean, you don't have even to listen to what I'm saying. Just look at India itself. Even India is bullied. The United States bullies India. You see how it was told that it should stop buying Russian oil. I mean, and it stopped. It was cornered. It was boxed into the corner and told it to stop buying Russian oil, so that it can be allowed access to the United States, so that sanctions, tariffs can be reduced on its goods and can be able to export to the United States market. So all these is because you have not built up enough muscle for you to compete globally, and you have not really understood your power, or you have not understood the leverage which you have, the resources, for example, which we have, which the world needs, and then the population, the huge population, which would provide a market for ourselves, and of course the $3.5 trillion of GDP that we have that just needs to be compounded, from which this is just a seed. The combined GDP of the African continent is just a seed from which all the other things that we are talking about can come from, and then feed the market, build the infrastructure, and then that will continue to double the economy that you want, and give your people a dignified life, standard of living all over the continent. So those so that conversation is important, that Africa puts its voice, but that voice will only be consequential if we have our house in order. And having our house in order, of course, requires us to resist against the neo-colonial system itself that is been putting us down for a very long time and telling us that we are nothing, we are not anything, that we don't matter, and then we have to beg for everything. So it is, I could say it is a 360 degree cycle that we have to engage in. We have to resist, and then we have to build, at home. And then that is when we will have a voice on the global stage, which is consequential, because even now we can have a voice, but that voice will not be consequential. So from resisting the current system, and then looking at our resources and compounding them and using them to build something, then to us having a consequential voice, on the international scene and the international stage.
Let's go to Middle East quickly. What kind of, how will this war affect the region when Iran wins, or if Iran wins? Will it stabilize the region with a new balance, or divisions will deepen?
Yeah, I think that if there will be deep division, there's likely to be deep divisions, because if I don't think Israel will relent in its push to have Iran destabilized, or even mutilated, divided, broken up from being a unified country into small states. Because Israel, of course, has succeeded in doing that in Syria. So it is likely to continue in that direction, to try to work with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia also has interest in having Iran destroyed or divided or weakened. So Israel is likely to continue to work with Saudi Arabia, and then United Arab Emirates in that direction of destabilizing Iran, even though the United States withdraws from this region. And so it is likely, the situation is likely to continue to be chaotic, because one would say that the presence of the United States there maybe had held off Israel somehow and controlled it a little bit. But if the United States withdraws completely, I think Israel is likely to create a lot more chaos within the region. And of course, I think that the other countries would try to double in, to mediate. But I think that's likely to be the trend. That's likely to be the trend that I anticipate in this situation, that they will gang up with Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates to try to continue to destabilize Iran, and maybe Iran and Qatar.
If you had to summarize in one sentence, what is at stake for the world, depending who wins this one?
Yeah, so I think what is at stake is everyone to take care of their own business, and those ones who don't understand that they are supposed to be taken care. I mean, those ones who don't understand that they are supposed to take care of their own business, they will be then subjugated. They continue to be subjugated, and with this being said, I'm horrified, for the global South countries, not just Africa, of course, even in South America, in Latin America. Of course, the United States is likely to to retreat into South America and continue to try to subjugate those countries there in South America. And you are seeing this even with Venezuela, and then how it is suffocating Cuba. So it's likely to go in there and continue to suffocate those countries if China and Russia don't really strengthen up and come to their rescue. But if Russia, if Iran is relatively able to come out strong and form up some alliance with the BRICS, maybe they might put a little bit of check, with on the United States. They can put it in check so that it will not oppress those countries, in the global South, and in Latin America and all the other countries. But of course, the weak would continue to be at the mercy of the strong if the weak don't want to build up their own strength. That is likely what is going to happen, even in the next era that we are approaching, whereby the power maybe will shift it to the east. That has always been the fate of nations, that if you don't think that you want to be strong, you will definitely be subjugated by others in one way or another. From colonialism, we saw slavery. Slavery came through. Then when slavery stopped, that subjugation, then they said that, oh, colonialism was better than slavery. All right? That, but because you are weak, they continue to subjugate you to all these things. And then when they said, oh, colonialism is better than slavery, is not the same as slavery. But the exploitation that came with it was the same. And then when colonialism was abolished, and the people fought against it, they brought neo-colonialism. That is why I mentioned to you that the United States presented itself as a benevolent power, and
Yeah.
said, "Oh, is telling the colonial powers to give up their colonies." But what was coming with the United States was even more sinister. That it is hidden exploitation through these institutions that were created, like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, that you are forced to give up your resources, using covert means, and your people will suffer and starve, and all these will be made a dumping ground. So the same exploitation that happened with slavery and colonialism is just, this one was in a different form. So even that is likely to come, even though it may look a little bit better, but that exploitation would be, the same, with the new players who may come on board. And this is not simply because these guys, they want to exploit you, but because you have put yourself in that position whereby you don't want to use the leverage which you have. You don't want to unify and use your resources. Then you leave yourself vulnerable to all kind of treatment and mistreatment. Because even if they gave you power, even if they gave you a seat, you would not know how to use that seat at the table,
Yeah.
So that's how difficult the
Yeah.
situation is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's definitely what is likely to happen.
You said as much as you would like to be optimist about the continent and its people, there's not so much. But you said you will put your card on the young people of the continent. Now, what should Africans, especially the young Africans, be paying attention right now as this conflict unfolds? Just a message.
Yeah, I think that the agitation, because all these victories, whether they are from the defeat of slavery, the defeat of colonialism, all these things were not achieved by people who were, watching the TikTok of the day, and then they were dancing in clubs, during the period, dancing to the music of the day. All these things were achieved, or being passive. They were not achieved even through being just passive and looking at things and say, oh, things will sort out themselves, or somebody will come and fight for us. They were achieved through deliberate effort and agitation. So there's supposed to be agitation, even though the system may look entrenched, especially on the African continent. whereby, like I said, constitutions were supplanted from the West and forced onto the African government systems, and political systems were supplanted from the West and pushed, into the African continent and the global South. The agitation is supposed to continue. That is the hope. That we have, that the young people are supposed to continue the agitation, and that agitation has to be anchored in the thinking of our forefathers who led us to independence, the likes of Nkrumah, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Haile Selassie, Patrice Lumumba, Honorable Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X. This is where we see that these kind of thinking has been almost washed away, has been almost been defeated in one way or another by the current neoliberal order, whereby they say that this kind of thinking, this ideology, this level of thinking is no more relevant in this age. But this is the thinking actually we are supposed to have within us when we are talking about this agitation that is supposed to happen, by the African people, because it is very relevant even today. The thinking of Nkrumah, the thinking of Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, is very, very relevant today, especially to the African people, both on the continent and in the diaspora. That when we are agitating, we should not be agitating to reform the system, but rather to supplant it with a new system that favors the interest of the African people, just like how the Chinese agitated in the 1949s and they were able to replace the colonial system with their own system that favors the Chinese. So that is the thinking, even though to a large extent there has been prevention by the current neo-colonial system, has tried to prevent that thinking of that purely African thinking from emerging, by claiming that the current system is democratic and therefore it is sufficient. We just need to keep reforming it and working on it until it is being perfected. So that is the thinking that has been now supplanted. But we have to, to rise above that kind of thinking, and rise to the level where we are able to integrate our strategy and our agitation with the thoughts and ideologies of our forefathers who fought for our independence and our freedoms, both on the continent and in the diaspora.
Thank you very much, Kwame. So with that, we have come to an end. I would like to thank you, our viewers here, I think at Tankara3897, if I'm not mistaken, the username. I read like that. Thank you for your support, and all of you. I mean, the chat section is crazy. I don't even begin to go and bring your question here, but I try to incorporate with my own as I hear conversate with Kwame. So the last word that I have is wars don't end. Or don't just end, they reshape the world that follows. The question is not only who wins, but who prepares for what comes next. So that's why we are having this discussion. For Africa, the future may depend on whether it just watch or acts. So thank you very much, Kwame, and hopefully you will visit us more often now. And there are people who expressed that they are happy to see you back after a long time. Thank you. Keep doing what you're doing, because that's, I think, your purpose in this life. At least I believe so.
Thank you very much, Mahlet. And thank you everyone for watching.
Okay.